Picture this. You're a detective investigating a serial predator who's been terrorizing your city for over a decade. 12 women attacked, 6 DNA-matched cases, hundreds of hours spent analyzing evidence, interviewing witnesses, building profiles. You've attended task force meetings. You've reviewed every piece of evidence. You've interviewed victims who described their attacker's voice, his methods, his cold precision. You've shared theories with your colleagues about who this monster might be. Then DNA results come back from a cigarette butt. The predator is sitting right next to you, at your desk, in your meetings, in your break room. He's been there the entire time, learning what you know, reviewing what evidence you've collected, possibly even interviewing his own victims. The badge wasn't protection from the monster. The badge was the monster. For 15 years, the South Side rapist stalked Lafayette, Louisiana, with such professional precision that investigators suspected he had law enforcement training. They were absolutely right. But they never imagined one of their own had been attending task force meetings about his own crimes, learning what evidence they had, staying one careful step ahead of every single investigation. Detective Randy Como fooled everyone. His colleagues, his victims, the FBI profilers, the community he swore to protect, until a computer program looked at a map and saw what human investigators couldn't see, a mathematical pattern that would expose where the predator lived. And when that address came back, it shattered everything the Lafayette Sheriff's Department thought they knew about one of their most respected detectives. August 30th, 1995. Anne's Night of Terror, Lafayette. Louisiana buzzed with college energy in late August 1995. Thousands of students returned to the University of Southwestern Louisiana for fall semester, filling apartments, bars, libraries, and coffee shops with youthful noise and optimistic energy. Among them was Anne, a determined 21-year-old senior. She worked at a local health club to pay for school, pulling shifts between classes, and picked up babysitting jobs on the side whenever she could. Every dollar counted when you're putting yourself through college without family financial support. One of her regular babysitting gigs was for a wealthy family in an affluent South Side neighborhood, the kind of place where city officials lived behind manicured lawns and tree-lined streets. The kind of neighborhood where you felt safe, leaving your doors unlocked, where everyone knew their neighbors, where crime seemed like something that happened somewhere else. On August 30th, the children's mother asked Anne to stay overnight while she traveled for business. It was an easy job, the kind Anne preferred. Put the kids to bed at 10, maybe do some homework at the computer, sleep in the comfortable guest room, and earn good money for minimal work. Anne tucked the 2 children in at 10 o'clock with bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. The house settled into that comfortable suburban silence that only comes when children finally drift off to sleep. She sat at the computer to work on homework assignments. The glow of the monitor, the only light in the quiet house, her textbook open beside the keyboard. At 11, exhaustion won. She saved her work, shut down the computer, checked that both children were sleeping peacefully, and retreated to the guest bedroom. She fell asleep quickly. At 2 in the morning, absolute terror shattered everything. Anne woke to a dark figure looming over her bed. A flashlight beam blazed directly into her eyes with blinding intensity, blinding her. She couldn't see his face, just the silhouette of a man holding a pistol. Scratchy wool gloves pressed against her skin. Behind a bandana and knit cap, piercing blue eyes stared down with cold calculation. His voice was calm, controlled, absolutely certain. He would end her life if she resisted. He would end the lives of the sleeping children down the hall if she screamed. She needed to understand that he was in complete control. Think about that for a second. You wake up to a gun in your face, a stranger in your bedroom, children sleeping nearby that you're responsible for protecting. What do? Anne did what she had to do. She stayed silent. The intruder forced her through every room of the house, claiming to search for valuables. But he didn't take anything. Not jewelry, not cash, not electronics. He found her backpack and pulled out her driver's license. He read her home address out loud, letting her know he knew exactly where she lived. If she went to police, he would find her. He would know. He would come for her. His voice carried absolute authority, not the shaky threats of a desperate criminal. The confident commands of someone who knew what he was doing. After he violated her, he led her to the bathroom with clinical precision. He ordered her to urinate, destroying potential DNA evidence. Then he told her to count to 100 before moving, slowly, out loud. And he warned her again, don't contact police. He would know if she did. Then he was gone. At the hospital, medical staff collected a full examination kit containing semen samples, but physical evidence beyond that was scarce. Anne could describe an overweight white male with unforgettable piercing blue eyes. Everything else had been hidden behind his tactical disguise. Days later, a friend called Anne with information that made her blood run cold. Another woman had endured an identical assault 3 years earlier, just 1 mile away. Every detail matched. The flashlight technique, the wool gloves, the psychological manipulation, even the specific words spoken. This wasn't random. This was a predator who had done this before, who had perfected his method, who was still out there. Detective Mac Gallion started pulling old case files. What he found made his stomach turn. The attack stretched back to 1984, over a decade of terror. 12 women had reported nearly identical assaults, all concentrated on Lafayette's south side, within a 5-mile radius. The pattern was disturbing in its consistency. Late-night break-ins, gun and flashlight, heavy disguise, psychological manipulation designed to prevent victims from reporting, often forcing victims to shower afterward, destroying forensic evidence. When DNA testing became available, investigators tested what samples remained. 6 of them matched perfectly. A single predator had been hunting Lafayette's south side for over a decade. The other samples were too degraded to test, but the behavioral evidence told the story. Same method, same area, same predator. Detective Gallion noticed something else. The victims weren't random. All the women shopped at the same grocery store. Many belonged to the same health club. Most lived alone in houses without window coverings, making it easy to observe them from the street. This was careful stalking, patient surveillance, someone who planned meticulously before striking. Then there was his tactical training, the way he held his flashlight, gripped behind the lens near his head rather than pointing it forward like civilians do. That's how law enforcement officers are trained. It keeps the light source close to your line of sight, while keeping one hand free for your weapon. And his language patterns, his threats about police contact carried absolute certainty. Not, I might find out, but I will know. Like someone with insider access to law enforcement information. Crime analyst Ronnie Smith developed a psychological profile that revealed even deeper manipulation. The post-assault showers served dual purposes. Yes, they destroyed forensic evidence. But they also psychologically cleansed victims, making them feel less violated, less likely to report. He was manipulating their trauma response. He even offered patronizing advice about home security, commenting on unlocked doors or windows, shifting blame onto victims for their supposed carelessness. One victim glimpsed his face when his bandana slipped momentarily. Police created a composite sketch. Another spotted a brown Ford pickup truck speeding away from her neighborhood immediately after her assault. But Louisiana had over 12,000 registered brown Ford pickups. And when police checked their own personnel, nobody matched. The case went cold. Then, after Ann's assault in 1995, the attack stopped completely. The South Side rapist vanished. Had he moved away, gone, or just become more careful? The case sat in boxes gathering dust until 1999. That's when Detective Gallion read an article in Police Chief magazine about something called Geographic profiling. It was revolutionary technology developed by Vancouver Detective Inspector Kim Rossmo. The theory was simple but powerful. Criminals, like everyone else, commit crimes near places they're comfortable, their homes, their workplaces, their regular haunts. Most criminals unconsciously create a comfort zone, an area where they feel confident and familiar. The locations of their crimes form patterns that can reveal where they live or work. Rossmo had developed computer software called Rigel that could analyze these patterns mathematically. Detective Gallion invited Rossmo to Lafayette. Rossmo examined every crime scene from the air and on foot. He visited locations during the day and at night, understanding how the predator would have seen them. He dismissed theories about the grocery store and health club connections. Instead, he focused on something simpler. Most victims lived in homes without curtains or blinds. The predator could watch them from the street, learning their routines, identifying women who lived alone. Back in Vancouver, Rossmo fed all the location data into Rigel. The software analyzed distances between crime scenes and assigned probability values to a 40,000 pixel grid covering the hunting area. The mathematical algorithms calculated the most likely location where the perpetrator lived or worked during the years of the assaults. When the results came back, investigators stared at the printout in disbelief. The computer had identified a specific half-square-mile neighborhood just 2 miles from every crime scene. According to Rigel's analysis, the predator had lived right there, right in the middle of all his hunting grounds. Detective Gallion started checking who lived in that area during the years of terror. The name that came up made his blood run cold. Deputy Sheriff Randy Como. Randy Como wasn't just any deputy. He was a 20-year law enforcement veteran, respected, trusted, known as a really nice guy by his colleagues. He specialized in juvenile cases, investigating physical and sexual abuse of children. The kind of work that requires patience, sensitivity, and trust. He was divorced with a young daughter. He was engaged to a woman who volunteered at the local rape crisis center. Think about that for a second. He was engaged to someone who helped victims of the exact crimes he was committing. That's not coincidence. That's cover. That's a predator positioning himself to monitor victims, to learn what they remembered, to stay ahead of investigations. Randy Como had lived in that half-square-mile area during the years of the assaults. He possessed all the tactical training displayed by the South Side rapist. He had access to law enforcement databases. He attended task force meetings. Sergeant Terry Reagan, who led the South Side Rapist Task Force, felt sick. He was investigating his friend, his colleague, someone he'd worked alongside for years, someone he'd trusted, socialized with, shared coffee breaks with. How do you even process that? Then an anonymous phone call came in November 1998. The caller told Captain James Kraft to investigate Randy Como for the rapes. The tip corroborated everything the Geographic profile suggested. Faith Moody, who ran the local rape crisis center, learned that someone who'd worked their cases, someone who appeared to champion victims, might be their greatest enemy. But they needed proof. Police couldn't just arrest Randy Como on suspicion. He was a cop. Any case against him would face intense scrutiny. Defense attorneys would tear apart anything less than absolute proof. They needed his DNA. Detectives sterilized an ashtray and placed it strategically during Como's coffee break at the station. They watched and waited. Como smoked a cigarette, stubbed it out in the ashtray, and went back to work. The moment he left, forensic technicians carefully extracted the cigarette butt with tweezers. That butt contained saliva. Saliva contained epithelial cells. Epithelial cells contained DNA. In the laboratory, chemical processes isolated those cells and dissolved everything else, revealing Randy Como's genetic blueprint. Then came the comparison. Como's DNA profile against semen samples from 6 rape cases. The results were definitive. Match, 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 match. Randy Como was the Southside rapist. The respected deputy sheriff who investigated child abuse had spent 15 years terrorizing women across Lafayette. He'd attended task force meetings about his own crimes, reviewed evidence from his own assaults, possibly interviewed his own victims. On January 18, 1999, police arrested Randy Como. The shock rippled through the department, through the entire community. How could someone they trusted, someone who wore a badge, someone who was supposed to protect people, be a serial predator? Under interrogation, Como didn't deny it. He confessed, not just to the 6 DNA-linked cases, but to additional assaults police hadn't connected to him. His victim count rose to 14 women over 15 years. Searches of his apartment uncovered a disturbing trophy collection. Victims' underwear, carefully preserved. Books about assault and control. Detailed maps of Southside neighborhoods with certain houses marked. At his brother's home in Shreveport, investigators found the brown Ford pickup witnesses had described. The truth emerged in its full horror. Randy Como had weaponized his law enforcement training against the community he swore to protect. He knew how investigations worked. He knew what evidence to destroy. He knew what psychological tactics would keep victims from reporting. His tactical flashlight technique wasn't coincidence. It was his professional training. His absolute certainty about knowing if victims reported wasn't bravado. It was insider access to police information. He'd been investigating his own crimes, learning what the task force knew, staying ahead of every lead. Here's something that still haunts the case. Como later told a fellow inmate that he had confided in only 2 people about the assaults before his arrest: a local priest and a New Orleans attorney. One of those 2 was the anonymous caller who finally exposed him. Think about that. Someone Como trusted with his darkest secret, someone bound by confidentiality, made the call that ended his reign of terror. Was it the priest, wrestling with the sanctity of confession versus protecting potential future victims? Was it the attorney, weighing attorney-client privilege against moral duty? We'll probably never know for certain, but that phone call in November 1998 was the break investigators needed. It pointed them toward a suspect they might never have seriously considered otherwise. One of their own, a decorated detective, a man who seemed above suspicion. Here's what makes this case even more disturbing. There had been warning signs, red flags that were ignored or dismissed. In the mid-1990s, before the Geographic profiling, Como's girlfriend at the time went to internal affairs with alarming information. She told them Randy Como should not be working in the juvenile division. She said he was a sex addict, that he was sexually perverted. She reported that his psychiatrist, Dr. Dupuy, had diagnosed him as a sex addict and prescribed lithium, an antipsychotic medication, to help control his urges. She said a counselor named Bill Leach wanted to hospitalize Como because his problems were so severe. But because of his job in law enforcement, hospitalization wasn't possible. Internal Affairs investigated, but the investigation was closed as inconclusive. No action was taken. Randy Como remained in the juvenile division. He continued investigating child abuse cases. He kept attending task force meetings about the Southside rapist. His girlfriend's warnings were ignored. How many of his final victims could have been spared if Internal Affairs had taken those warnings seriously? Randy Como pleaded guilty to 6 counts of aggravated assault. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA doesn't lie. His confession filled in details only the real predator would know. On sentencing day, the judge didn't hesitate. 6 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 of those sentences to run consecutively, ensuring Randy Como would never walk free. His victims, at least the ones who could be identified, ranged in age from 21 to 55. 14 women whose lives were forever changed by a man who used his badge as cover for his crimes. The civil lawsuits followed quickly. Victims sued the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Department for negligence, for ignoring the girlfriend's warnings, for failing to investigate rumors that law enforcement might be involved, for allowing one of their own to terrorize the community for 15 years. The case became a textbook example of how institutions can fail to police themselves, how people don't want to believe one of their own could be a monster, how badges and uniforms create blind spots in investigations. Randy Como is now in his mid-60s. He's serving his 6 consecutive life sentences at the David Wade Correctional Center in Homer, Louisiana, a maximum security facility in the northern part of the state. He will never be eligible for parole. He will never walk free. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. According to records from 2024, he's still there, still serving his time, still living with what he did. One account from someone who met him in prison described Como as unable to come to terms with being a criminal. Like many ex-cops in prison, he viewed his crimes as momentary aberrations from his duty to protect and serve. He still saw himself as one of the good guys with guns who protected people from the bad guys, even though he was the bad guy, even though he spent 15 years terrorizing innocent women. His perception of his own crimes remained disconnected from reality. The case revolutionized criminal investigations. Lafayette Police Department was one of the first agencies in America to use geographic profiling to identify a suspect. The success led to widespread adoption of the technology. Kim Rosmo's Rigel software is now used by law enforcement agencies worldwide. The case is taught in criminal justice courses as proof that mathematical analysis can expose patterns invisible to human investigators. Anne, the college student whose assault in 1995 became one of the final connected cases, found a way forward. The trauma never completely disappeared. How could it? But she chose to view her survival as an opportunity for growth, for deeper appreciation of life and relationships. She was free from wondering whether her attacker walked among the crowds at the grocery store, free from scanning faces for those piercing blue eyes, free from the constant low-level terror of knowing he was still out there. Let's talk about what makes this case particularly chilling. Randy Como didn't just work in law enforcement. He used law enforcement as his weapon. His tactical training taught him how to control victims efficiently. His insider knowledge let him monitor investigations into his own crimes. His badge gave him legitimacy when neighbors saw his truck in certain areas. He was just a cop on patrol, nothing suspicious. He attended task force meetings where investigators shared theories about the predator's identity. He heard every lead they pursued. He knew exactly when they were getting close and when they were chasing dead ends. He may have even interviewed his own victims in his capacity as a detective. You can imagine that. Sitting across from a woman you violated, taking her statement, offering sympathy, promising to catch the monster responsible. While knowing you are the monster, the psychological manipulation was expert level. Forcing victims to shower wasn't just about destroying DNA evidence. It was about making them feel clean again, reducing the trauma that would push them to report. Giving them home security advice shifted blame onto them. Maybe it was partially their fault for leaving a window unlocked. His choice to stop assaulting after 1995 shows calculation. The task force was getting more sophisticated. DNA technology was improving. He knew the risks were increasing. So he stopped while he was ahead, but he couldn't escape mathematics. Geographic profiling is beautifully simple in concept, but incredibly complex in execution. Kim Rosmo's Rigel software analyzed every crime location. It calculated distances between scenes. It accounted for barriers like highways, rivers, and railroad tracks that criminals unconsciously avoid crossing. Then it generated a probability map. Not the criminal lives exactly here, but these areas have the highest mathematical probability of containing the criminal's anchor point. For the Lafayette case, that anchor point was a half-square-mile neighborhood, and Randy Como had lived right in the center of it during the years of the assaults. When he was arrested in 1999, he'd moved just one block outside that predicted zone. But during the active years of terror, he'd lived exactly where the computer said he would. Think about that for a second. A computer program looked at dots on a map and predicted where a serial predator lived, without knowing anything about him, without having a suspect list. Just pure mathematical analysis of human behavior patterns. And it was right. That's the power of geographic profiling. Criminals think they're being random. They're not. They're operating within comfort zones, following unconscious patterns, leaving mathematical fingerprints on the landscape. Randy Como thought he was being careful. He varied his timing. He disguised his appearance. He destroyed evidence. He used his insider knowledge to stay ahead of investigators. But he couldn't escape his own psychological need for familiarity. He hunted near home, near work, near the places he felt comfortable and in control. The computers saw what his victims couldn't see, what his colleagues couldn't see, what traditional detective work couldn't reveal. He was the spider in the center of the web. 14 women, 14 lives forever changed, ages 21 to 55. Some were college students, some were professionals, some were mothers. They were daughters, sisters, friends. Randy Como chose them because they were vulnerable, because they lived alone, because he could watch them through uncovered windows, because they shopped at certain stores or worked out at specific gyms. They weren't random victims. They were carefully selected targets in a predator's hunting ground. For 15 years, they lived with trauma, not knowing their attacker was attending task force meetings, working in law enforcement, presenting himself as a champion of victims. When his identity was revealed, many victims felt a new wave of violation. The man who was supposed to catch the monster was the monster. The system that was supposed to protect them had employed their predator. Some victims testified during his sentencing. They wanted him to see their faces, to hear how he damaged their lives. to know they survived despite what he did to them. His 6 life sentences weren't enough. How could any sentence be enough? But at least it ensured he would never hurt anyone else. So what do we learn from Randy Como's 15-year reign of terror? Predators hide in plain sight. Badges don't guarantee goodness. Uniforms don't prove integrity. Sometimes the person you trust most is the person you should fear most. Warning signs get ignored when we don't want to believe them. Como's girlfriend reported him to internal affairs. The investigation went nowhere because nobody wanted to believe a decorated detective could be a serial predator. Technology can expose patterns humans miss. Geographic profiling revealed what years of traditional investigation couldn't find. Mathematical analysis doesn't have blind spots. It doesn't make excuses for cops. It just calculates probabilities. Institutions must be willing to police themselves. The Lafayette Sheriff's Department's failure to seriously investigate one of their own allowed Como to assault for years after warning signs appeared. Victims are never to blame. Como's attempts to shift responsibility onto victims, commenting on unlocked doors, suggesting they were careless, was manipulation. Predators create justifications for their crimes. Don't let them. DNA evidence is only as good as the databases it's checked against. If investigators had required all law enforcement personnel to submit DNA samples, Como might have been caught years earlier. But nobody wanted to treat their colleagues as potential suspects. Randy Como is now 60-something years old, locked in a Louisiana prison for the rest of his natural life. He wears a different uniform now. Instead of a badge, he wears a number. The women he violated have had to rebuild their lives around the trauma he inflicted. Some moved away from Lafayette. Some stayed and faced their fear. All of them carry scars that time hasn't fully healed. But they survived. And Como didn't win. He thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought his insider knowledge kept him safe. He thought 15 years of success meant he'd never be caught. He was wrong. Sometimes justice takes 15 years. Sometimes it takes an anonymous phone call from someone who violated a confidence because staying silent was worse than breaking a promise. Sometimes it takes a computer program analyzing dots on a map. But eventually, the truth comes out. Even when the monster wears a badge. Even when the predator investigates his own crimes. Even when the man sworn to protect becomes the thing we need protection from. Randy Como proved that evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like a respected detective. A nice guy, a colleague you trust, until a cigarette butt reveals what he really is. And mathematics exposes where he's been hiding all along. Right in the center of his hunting ground. Right in the middle of the web. Thinking his badge made him invisible. Thinking his training made him untouchable. Until the computer looked at a map and saw exactly what he was.